is an interview with Mr. Carl Pendergrass of Little Falls, New York. The purpose of the interview is to discuss Mr. Pendergrass's experiences along the New York State Barge Canal. The interview is being conducted at the locktender's house at Lock 17 in Little Falls, New York. The date is Sunday, November 6th, 1977. My name is Craig Williams. All right, Mr. Pendergrass, if you could just tell me when you were born and your full name.
My name is Calvin Everett Pendergrass. And I was born up in Jacksonburg, RD2 Mohawk. It's halfway between Little Falls and Jacksonburg. Lock 18 is right in Jacksonburg. I was born there and went to local schools and tried my luck in a few shops. And I didn't really care for inside work. I enjoyed some of the work I had, but inside work all seemed kind of confining to me. I wanted to be on the outside. And so after I was, well, my earlier years, I worked in the shops. As I say, I didn't care for them, so I was 22 years old when I came to work for the state.
What type of shops?
Well, I worked in Remington Arms.
In Ilion?
In Ilion. That was a good job that I gave up. I worked for HP Snyder, manufactured bicycles in the fall. I worked for Cherry Burrow.
Who?
Cherry Burrow. They, well, the time I worked there, they made a lot of everything from the milk industry. Bottle washers, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 wide. And you got a rack that's for 12 bottles, and you go to the machine and they'll come out sterilized. When they're using the old glass bottles, which they don't use very much anymore. And I worked for different farms. And let's see, where else did I work? I guess that's about the only shops I've worked. When I was 20 years old, of course my father worked on the canal before me. And,
What was your father's full name?
Edward. Edward, to tell you the truth, I can't remember his full name right now. But his name is Edward. Edward.
Do you remember when he was born?
I remember the year, 1888. And he came from Washington County, out of Fort Edward. And near Glennsboro, that area, northwest of us here. And he was just a kid. There was a big family. And he had to go out and find a job because his father could only feed so many. When the kids got young enough, they were out to work. If they wanted to eat, they worked. So he banged around a little bit, and then he came, he was just a young man. I can't remember, can't tell you his age right now, but he came to work for the, I believe it was Acme Engineering and Construction Company that was building the canal. That's the improved area in Bryce Canal.
Here in Little Falls?
Which is good, pardon?
They were building it here in the Little Falls area?
I know he worked on the level between this lock and Jacksonburg. I know that because my mother used to tell me. And my mother's older sister ran a boarding house in Jacksonburg.
And what was her name?
Leah. Her name was Florence Shipley.
Shipley?
Shipley.
Spell that?
Her maiden name, Shibley. And her married name was Kanzog, K-A-N-Z-O-G. And they saw the interest of having a boarding house because there was a lot of workers through this area at this time, building this canal. And so they had this boarding house, and of course my father came there to board. And that's how he met my mother.
And your mother's name?
Leah, L-E-A-H, Leah Shibley. It was her maiden name. And as time went on, they got married and lived here all their lives.
When did they get married?
Can't ask that question. I mean, can't answer that question either. I'm not very good on dates.
Do you remember when she was born?
I can't remember when she was born either. I can't remember her dates. But anyway, the dredge was a hydraulic dredge for a steam dredge that was dredging the canal from Little Falls to Jacksonville. And the name of the dredge was a General Herkimer. And he worked there until the canal was open. And he took the examination for a lock operator and passed the examination and got the job at Lock 18, Jacksonville. He could walk to work. He was home right to the lock.
What were his duties on the dredge?
I imagine. I know he was oiler at one time, but I imagine he started out as deckhand and worked his way up to oiler. And whether he went to an operating engineer or not,
I don't understand what an oiler does.
an oiler oils the machinery. He works with the engineer. He works hand in hand with the engineer. He's the next man under the engineer. And as time progresses, he knows his job. He knows as much as the engineer should know as much as the engineer. And he progresses to engineering. And he's the engineer's right-hand man. If the damn machinery has to be taken apart, well, he gets the tools, he does what the engineer says, and he has the responsibility to upkeep of the machinery, greasing and the oil of all the machinery on the dredge. And as I stated, he took the lock operator job when he was there until the year 1939 when he died. He died in 1939. I was 11 years old when he died. And I don't remember too much about him, but what my mother told me. So I get the second hand from my mother. He told me the different things. All the years he worked for the state, he worked for the construction company, he worked for the state. He was never laid off. He was never laid off except one winter. And they took the key men that they wanted to keep, but they didn't want to move someplace else. They took their best men, and the superintendent had him go across the flats from the south side of the river where the lock is, to the north side, and there was a big woodlot over there. And he had him cut wood all winter. And then in the spring they got hired back. They hired him back in the spring, and that was the only time, all the years we found out it was from 19... Well, the canal was built in 1905, 1916, and probably in the middle of this time, he got his job. He was just a kid. I don't know whether he was 16 or what, you know, just a kid that was working. And at that time, there was a lot of things going on in the canal. There was a lot of double lockings in those times. What I mean by double locking was a barge, a tug, and usually 4 barges pulled along behind them. And these were old banners. Some of them were
Old what?
Old, they were old tugs.
You call them banners?
I call them old banners. Yeah, just figure to speak. But see, at that time they were going from the transaction from steam. They were going from the transaction from steam to diesel. From coal to oil. And all this was taking place in this time of the year. A lot of it was. And there'd be a lot of double lockings, as I started to say. The tug would bring the first 2 barges in. And you'd lock them through.
The 2 barges.
2 barges. First 2 barges in the tug would be up and fill the lock. And you'd lock those through. And they'd tie up like if they were going west, you'd tie them up on your upper wall. You dump the lock and go back, and you'd bring the last 2 barges in with your winch, or your capstan, whatever you call it. Pull those in the lock, you'd get them started, and they'd get underway, and then they'd release their line and turn back up on the deck of the barge. didn't have a good west wind blowing. Lots of times, not lots of times, sometimes you have a good west wind blowing, you'd have to throw a line on twice, or the wind would stop them. They had no power. You'd stop them, and you'd have to get the line on again to get them the lock. Raise them up, and then they tug it back, the first two parties back up, and they'd line up, and tie the line down, away they go.
How long would it usually take to go through this operation for double lock?
Oh, it's been so long since we've had a double lock. Well, you want to figure an hour and a half anyway.
You mean you've actually seen these gone through? It's not something...
I locked them through myself in the early 1950s. I came around the canal in April 1950. I got on a derrick boat right here. And I believe it, well, I'll tell you right what it was, April 18th, 1950. And I got on a derrick boat right here, and we had to get Lock 17. We had to go east to set the buoys right under the canal. And almost lost a rigger.
A rigger?
A rigger is a man who rigs for, he does all the, well, he's in charge of deck work. Splicing cables, splicing lines, and all that. Threw a buoy off, they pick them up with a derrick boat, they boom out over the side, and they drop the buoy. Well, usually when they drop the buoy, the hook comes out, flies out, so the derrick boat goes on, and she's underway, there's a tugboat. Well, this time the hook didn't come out. They all had to stop and dragging the buoy, so the rigger stepped off the derrick boat onto the buoy. And when he did, by the wind or the pull of the tug that was pulling the derrick boat, slid away from the buoy, left him hanging right on the buoy there. Well, let me tell you, that water was cold, 18th of April. That was ice water.
Do you remember his name?
Ralph Stoddard. Ralph Stoddard. Yep, he was the rigger. There was Bucky Ladd, the captain. Ralph Stoddard was the rigger. Carl Pendergrass was the engineer. Ralph Stoddard was from Silver Beach. Bucky Ladd was from Schuyler Corners. Ralph, I'm getting mixed up. Carl Pendergrass, his nickname was Honey. He was the engineer and oiler. And myself, I was a deckhand. A guy by the name of Jerry Hansen, big Swede from Minnesota. He was another deckhand. And we had another deckhand from Utica, we called Snuffy. He was the third deckhand. And Leo Kinney was a cook.
Kinney?
Kinney. Leo Kinney was a cook.
What was the name of the derrick boat?
DB1.
DB1?
DB1. And T7, a little tug, tender, was our tender. In those days, when the derrick boat went out, they always had a tender and it worked good. Push the scholars back and forth from line go to the mouths of these creeks and dig out the debris that came in during the winter and the spring to clear the channel for the canal. That was a lot of our work. And we'd lay riprap, stone, this stone along the canal, that's called riprap. We had in the fall of the year, we'd always have to lay riprap. One day, Honey was, we'd always have Friday, we'd always clean up the boat. Dirt and coil up our lines and put our hoses away and everything because Saturday and Sunday would be off. And Honey always carried a handful of waste in his back pocket from wiping off the machine. That'd be oily and greasy, but that was to clean his hands off, and he'd always stick that old piece of waste in his overalls pocket, see? So Bucky Ladd, the captain, one day said, let's pull a little something on Honey. Everybody was for it, says, okay, good, fine, it's not Friday. So So Honey always stood in the doorway of the engine room with his hand up on the door frame like that, and his back. And there was a door on both sides of the boat that you could walk right through, see. So he said to me, Bucky says to me, he says, I'm going behind Honey, and I'm going to set his waist on fire, his pocket. And he says, when I holler fire, he said, you stand there with a it was in the summertime, nice and warm. He said, you stand there with a 5-gallon pail of water and throw it.
This waist was a cloth?
It was a cloth, yeah, it was like stringy cloth, you know. Used especially for wiping up oil and stuff in the machine. So it happened, gee, you should have seen Honey jump in that water there. He didn't know what happened. First, Bucky set him on fire, and he didn't get hurt. You know, I threw the water before, because the main thing was get him wet. They were good days. I was young. I was 22 years old, and everything, the canal was a lot of fun. We did our work. We knew what our job was. But the working conditions was good. They fed good on those boats. We'd get our meals, 3 meals a day on the boat.
What were some of your meals?
Oh, anything you could imagine. Just like you were eating at home. We ate the best. Our state fed us good. I will say that about it. And besides the fact, Bucky, the captain, had a garden at home. And all his vegetables and everything that he raised in his garden, he'd bring along with the grub check. Oh, some boats didn't feed so good, and other boats did, but I was just lucky enough to get on a boat that was fed real well. And he was a great man for clam chowder and Limburger cheese. Every Friday, would be kind of well, as I say, we're cleaning up the boat, putting things away, and everybody was kind of in a hurry, and we'd have a quick meal for our last meal on Friday afternoon. That would always be clam chowder. That's how I learned from Bucky myself how to make clam chowder, Manhattan style. And, or we'd have rye bread and Limburger. And, oh boy, they were really the good old days. I'll never forget them.
What happened to the DB1?
Oh, let's see. I think the DB1 is being, it seems to me they took the DB1 last year and they took her apart and put some of the parts on another boat. She was getting real old. She was an old boat when I came on there in 1950. She was an old boat. She was kept up well. But she was an old boat.
How old were you when you came to work on the boat?
I was, for the state, 22.
22?
22.
What made you come down to work on the canal?
Well, I don't know.
Did somebody suggest it to you?
It was outside work to begin with, and it was close. It was, I didn't have to go away from home. And everything was here, and I said, well, I said, I'll give it a try. And the more I stayed on the canal, of course, the more I enjoyed it.
Did the fact that your father had worked on the canal?
It may have something to do with it. I don't know. I never said that was the reason that I came to work.
And your grandfather had worked on the canal?
And my grandfather, my mother's father, George Shipley, I believe, worked on the old lock at Jacksonville, the old Derrick Canal lock. He was, he had some kind of a job. I don't know whether he was a handyman or whether he was just what he did, but he had something. I don't know whether he was a lock operator or not, but he had something to do with a lock. He was affiliated with Lock 40 at Jacksonville. 39 was your last lock, old lock at Little Falls, and you went from 39 to 40 in Jacksonville. And I had an uncle, Max Kanzog, who was my mother's sister's husband, that was a carpenter and worked on the carpenter barge on the old Erie Canal.
Carpenter barge?
Carpenter barge.
You mean like a scow?
Yep. And they used to tell me how they used at night. Not like today, you step on somebody's property today, they're ready to shoot you or arrest you. And at night, he worked all along the canal, the old Erie Canal through this area. And at night they'd tie up, and when they had their supper and everything, the first thing they'd have to do is unload their horses. And no matter where they were, you just turned your horses out. There was a field, you just turned them in the field. That was it. And nobody said anything. Or if you wanted to cut hay for them the next day, or you just took the side and went out, no matter where you were. Cut your hay down and had your hay for your horses for wherever you were the next day.
Do you remember a specific name for that carpenter boat?
No. I have pictures of it. And there also was, you see it was in my family, maybe because it was in my family, that was one reason why I came to work for the state down in Canada. There was a man named, he was a Swede named Emil Pearson.
What was the first name?
Emil Pearson. He came over, he was on deep sea for a long time, and then finally came inland. He didn't care for deep sea anymore, he came inland to work, and he worked on the building of the improved Erie Barge Canal, this one. And he was a tugboat captain. I have his license for him.
On which tug?
The Mary Bell. Mary Bell was the name of the tug.
Was that one of the state tugs?
No, that was a contractor tug. And he told me some experiences that I can't think of right now. One thing he did, he backed the tug down to his high water. He had to bring a piece of equipment down to Little Falls, and he always told me that the current was so tough that day that he backed that tug. The tug was going forward against the current and going backward, and that's the way they got to Little Falls. And the tug under power going ahead, they just ease off and go back a little bit, ease off and go back. That's how he got it down to the dock here in Little Falls. So, well, I did a little bit of time in the service. October 1950, and left the boys in the derrick boat. They had a big party for me at Judy's Tavern up in Jacksonburg. Me and another fellow was going in this fellow working the yards at the time.
What was his name?
Stanley Nichols. He was a friend of mine, boyhood friend. We grew up together. We went in the service the same day, and well, I did a little time in the service, landed in the 28th Infantry, and I've got a good thing and a good and bad handicap. I have a shoulder that dislocates, my right shoulder. And, the first time it happened when I was a kid skating on the ice in the wintertime on the old canal. And that doesn't happen too much, but once in a while, and this happened while I was in service, and I got out of the service that way. I only did 8 months in the service, 28th Infantry during the Korean conflict. Well, they went to Munich, Germany. I'm kind of sorry I missed that, but I came. June 1951, I came home, and you see, it was this way. In those years, they weren't paying anything. The state didn't pay nothing.
Any benefits?
Well, you had your benefits, you had your pension that you paid yourself. But man, by the time they took your pension out, and took your taxes out, you was working for nothing. They couldn't get guys. They were screaming for guys on the canal. You know? And they had all different types of guys working on the canal. So I was on my way to Utica, and they were building either an airfield up around Syracuse, or they were working on I forget just what it was, but a friend of mine in Jacksonburg said, "Hey, where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to Utica and go back to work on the canal." He says, "I got a better job for you, driving Uke for this construction."
Driving?
Euclid is the name of these big construction trucks. And I thought it over right on Main Street in Milwaukee. Pulled over the side, and I thought it over for a while, and I said, let me give the canal a try again. There's something that brought me back. I think it was the good times on a derrick boat. I said, let me go back. So I went to Utica. Bill Lysett was the superintendent at that time, 1951. one hell of a good egg. He saw me come in the door and he said, well, he said, we're glad to have you back. He says, we've got to change the derrick boats are filled. We don't do any changing this summer, so he says, why don't you go down to Lock 18 as a lock helper? So I went down, he introduced me to the chief operator, and his name is Ray Lipp. He boarded at Fort Plain, and he drove back and forth to Fort Plain. And his home was in Elmira. And he was a sick man when I came to work.
Had he been working here long?
I don't know just how much time. I don't think Ray had a lot of time in. I think, I can't really tell you. I don't know why. But I'm saying like 20 years. I don't think he had 20 years. Maybe Ray had 10. Maybe 10 years. I don't really know. I can't remember. But anyway, he was the chief operator. And I had the good fortune to work with three good men that had come up on the canal since they were young men.
Here, before we continue, just let me flip the tape over.
Yeah.
All right, you can begin again.
As I was talking, these two fellows I worked with, these fellows started on the canal when they were young men, and this is 1951. They were putting the New York State Thruway through at that time. And one fellow was named Stanley Marasek from Little Falls, and the other fellow's name was Leon Milkarski from, I believe he lived in Emmonsburg at the time, and the other was Frank Foley, Jigger. We call him Jigger Foley. So anyway, they taught me a lot. Ray Lipp was a good boss, but he was a very nervous man, and he had a lot, he wasn't in too good health. And he was a good man to work for because I did a day's work and he appreciated it. I guess before me, he had a lot of guys that didn't do nothing. But anyway, the three men that I'm talking, I had the opportunity to work with them on the water wheels. This is going in where we generated our own power.
In the water wheels?
In the water wheels. We had, in wintertime, we'd have to go down in the turbine cases and work on the water wheels and generators in wintertime. It was a good old ace in the hole. If you didn't have nothing else to do, you could always climb in the turbine case and say you were working. But we had a lot of work on it because they run 24 hours a day. You change them off over every 24 hours. And every powerhouse had two generators. If you would like to see them at 18 to this day, you go up there and you see the two generators still standing. You use one for heat and one for...
When were they replaced here?
Well, I believe they were replaced here. They took the generators out, I believe, in 1957.
And they used today?
What they use today? Well, we buy our power from Niagara. It's all three-phase AC. And when they stripped this locker room all the way through, they took DC motors, they took everything out. It was three-phase all the way, 250 volt. So, well, getting back to my early days, I had an engineer that knew my father. His name was Harry Jewell from Little Falls. He was the nicest man I ever worked for in my life. He was smart as a whip. He was a professional, licensed civil engineer, and that guy knew his stuff. And every day he went to work, I don't know whether you probably had this opportunity yourself. You work with a man that knows his business, and it's a pleasure to work with him. You know, treats everybody fine, he knows what he's doing, he's relaxed. Well, this was the type of guy Harry Jewell was. So as I say, they were relocating the canal at Herkimer, and they had to put a complete survey through. They were going to take a big bend out of the canal, and they were going to run the canal right straight through these fields and creeks and old marshes and everything. And Harry would come down, and make that chief matter, at 18. Harry would come down, see, they couldn't get the men. They weren't paying anything, And they couldn't
What was the pay?
The pay? I think I came to work for about $1,800 a year. So they needed men, and they needed men who would do what they were told, and were good at the job what they did. So Harry would come down and tell us, say, and of course he had ranks. He was ranked high above a chief operator, as a civil engineer. Well, Ray, he says, I'm going to take your helper today. Geez, I put Ray right now. Oh, I put him right now, frazzled. He wouldn't be good for 2 days. Sometimes I'd be gone 3 or 4 days. I'd never come back. It was then during the summertime, gee, I'd never hardly see the lock at all. I'd leave Ray without a helper, make him marry. But I worked with good men, good engineers. I'll try to remember their names. Harry Jewell was the boss, and I say he was a college man, professional engineer. I worked with Bob Dennison Jr., Bob Dennison Sr., both good men. Johnny Hughes, much older man, but he was an engineering aide. He ran the boat.
What was the boat?
The boat, it was just well, they called it the engineering boat. What it was just a buoy boat, what they use today for buoy boats. But it would take us to the field, and instruments and tapes and everything, and stakes and sledgehammers and everything. It would take us to the site of the job where we were working, because sometimes we'd be held 3/4 of a mile away from the field office, up the canal. Tie her off, we'd go back in and cut brush. My job was line cutter, cutting brush. They'd sight through the instrument, pick a line, find the line where they had to go, and then we'd make stations. Drive the stakes in, square, maybe 2-inch square stake, drive it down in the ground, and right at the point of this intersection, or the point of the line, we'd drive a nail down it. And we'd move the instrument up, and they'd go over this, they'd move the instrument right over this nail, drop the plumb bob down on the nail, and go ahead. So I got my share of engineering work too, see? Well, it came to the end of the job, and I kept going up there and hanging around, and there wasn't too much to do, and I'd go down and I'd sharpen tools, and I'd go down and talk to the buoy tender down at the Herc and return home. Pretty soon one of the engineers come down to me and says, Penny, he says, Harry wants you to stay here steady. Well, it was a big surprise to me.
This is at the end of October, 1951?
Yeah, or 52.
52?
I can't say right now because I don't have time to think about it. But it was during the process of the changeover of the barge canal in Herkimer from its old route just west of the Garnage to its new route. And I said, well, gee, this is more than I expected. Wow, good engineering job, you know? So I went up and I talked to Harry, and Harry said, yeah. He said, I want you to stay. He said, I want you to work in the office with me all the time. So we went to Utica. He said, I'm going to Utica this afternoon. He said, I want to talk to him and tell him that I want you with me all the time. And he came back and he says, you didn't tell me one thing. I said, what's that? He said, you didn't tell me you didn't have a high school education. And that was the only thing that stopped me from going into the engineering field instead of in the operational fields of lockout. So anyway, he felt bad about that, and I felt bad about it also. And he wanted me to take an equivalency, high school equivalency test, and try to come back with it. But I was trying to raise a family. My wife couldn't work, the kids were young, I had 2 boys to bring up. And I'll tell you, money was scarce. These guys working on this throughway used to come down, and they'd say, you're foolish, you're crazy for working here. He said, look at my check. He said, I've made more money in 1 day in 2 days than you have all week. They're right. But I'll tell you, I'm farther ahead today than some of them. So I stayed at 18 for a couple of years as a helper. I worked with a chief. This old chief had to retire. He died a short time later. Phil Wyper from Utica. He was another good guy. He was another good chief. I had a lot of lawn to mow. There was no dry down in the lawn mowers. You walk. You shagged right behind that lawnmower. Let me tell you, have you ever been to Lock 18? It's just like a park. You've got a lot of lawn. Of course, a young fella didn't give a damn. Saturdays was set aside to mow lawns. I mow that whole damn lawn on Saturday. Think about it. Today I couldn't mow a quarter of it before I had to sit down and have a cup of coffee. But anyway, I took examinations. I failed my first examination for lockout. But the following year they had another exam. I took that, passed it. An old bill I set them down, and they sent me the papers. I signed them. He said, we're going to get you a job. We got you a job. There's an appointment at Lock 17, Little Falls. I lived right here in Little Falls at the time, which was beautiful.
This was still about 1952 or 53?
This was I became the lock operator in 1954.
1954.
October 1954. I walked on this place here, and I've been here ever since. Came down here, and boy, I'll tell you, this is a big lock. The only thing I could think of was, man, you come in here, and I knew something about the generators, how to change them over and everything, but boy, the chief says, kid, he says, this is when I will get in my car and leave, this is your lock, and you're responsible for every damn thing that happens. I'll never forget it. I said, okay, so they kept me on with an operator being transferred to Fort Plain for about 3 days. I think I locked 2 boats through here, and they come in, they said, you're on your own. Goodbye. Out the door. I had to come in, I let the generators over, the old generators in here singing away, and at that time we furnished power for the lift bridge here in Little Falls too. The lift bridge. You remember, did you ever? No, probably not. But there was a lift bridge just so half a mile west of the lock here. I'd only been an operator for a year or so. I guess the following year when I was here. I had the Mary Moraine. She was a pusher going through here. And they had no landfill dumps in those days. They just dumped and burned. And I had the boat through here. She was between the bridge and me, down here. I walked down to the office, closed the upper end, the gates and the valves, and walked down here. I smelled smoke. Gee. I said, it's a dump. Didn't think anything about it. So I went in, I wrote down the boat on the log, and come back out. I saw smoke rolling out of the powerhouse window. The door. Man, I'm telling you, you don't think I was scared. So I run in here, and you couldn't see. It was all full of smoke. First thing I did was run back. I saw smoke coming out of the jack shaft bearing on the #1 machine.
The jack shaft bearing?
Yeah, that's where the jack shaft, the power from the generator, would operate your jack shaft. Your jack shaft went to your governor system. They govern your generator. Your governor system also governed your wickets and your water wheel down below. I run in and call the bridge. See, I couldn't shut down the power because he might give the boat the green light. See, and I was furnishing power for him. So old Pickles McDonald was up there. He was politically appointed. Smart man in his day. Still a smart man, but old man. He was in his 80s. And I said, Pickles, I said, we've got to shut her down. I said, I'll talk to you later, but don't give that boat the green. Run back in here, shut this #1 machine down. Started #2 up. Got Pickles ready to put the Mary Moraine through. He could raise the bridge up there. And then I started looking, and I found out what happened. The bearing got so hot she started to melt from lack of oil. Now this man passed away, and I'm not going to mention his name. But he was the chief operator, and on these jobs you have good and you have bad. And he was a hard chief to work with because he wouldn't do anything himself. And as a matter of fact, his job was to oil these machines, the bearings, and oil them with rings that went around. As your shaft turned around, you pull these rings around with it and lubricate. Well, he just didn't lubricate. So, well, there was a bearing down. A number one machine, he had to call. He said, how did it happen? Well, I said, just look at the paint. Look at the burned off paint on the bearing house, the housing of the bearing. I said, gee, you can tell. What happened is lack of oil. So he had to make a decision. He had to call Utica and tell him. Naturally, he knew right away it was neglect. I never saw an electrical supervisor so mad in all my life. He came down, he walked in, the chief was in the office, the old office over there. This is where we're sitting, was our car house right here.
You mean the building just west of here?
The office, the old office is right between the garage and this building here. They were built during World War I for guards. They were guard shades. All your locks had guards, soldiers during the course of the war. And after the soldiers moved out after the war, the state took the buildings over, and that was the old offices every lock had. Before that, the operators would have to stand out. There was no control stands or nothing like that. They stood right out in the open, rain or whatever, operated. So getting back to this, this is one time that I saw a chief operator get chewed out. He got chewed out fair, and he deserved it because you'd get mad at him in a way because he wasn't doing what he was supposed to be doing, and he'd shove a lot of his work over on you. But in another way, he was a good guy to work with because he was friendly in some ways. And I was no angel. I was just a young kid, you know, and I like to take a drink once in a while, you know. And a few things happened. There was money flow, you know. But he'd cover for me, and I'd cover for him. I just wish. The man died, William Guinea. William Guinea was a dam tender foreman here for years. I guess he had 43 or 44 years service. Worked with my father on the canal. His son today, Dick Guinea, is a foreman here in Little Falls. I just wish that I could remember all the things he told me about the canal. I couldn't use the language. I just wish that I could remember to tell you. Maybe some other day when we bring another tape down, I'll be able to remember it, write it down. So I've been here ever since, and I've gone from the old hoodledashers, the old...
What's a hoodledasher?
Hoodledasher? They were the old tugs that pulled the barges.
Just the tug itself was the hoodledasher.
Yeah, she was the hoodledasher. The oldest, the oldest boat I ever saw in the canal, and still operation, was the Frank Lowry. And I got to start to talk about that, but anyway. She had a hold, she had an engine room, and she had a cargo hold forward. And she was just about as long as a barge. But they were slim barges. They were the old canal tugs. They were built for barges. They were built for the old canal. And when they come into these locks here, they look small. See?
They were powered by steam?
They were powered. No, these were powered by diesel at that time. This is the 15. Well, this one back on his helper up to 18 back in the early 50s. And there was an incident that I never forgot on the Frank Lowry. They'd bring scrap iron from New York City and take it to Buffalo. It's the smelting mills up there. They'd smelt it there, see, and bring it back down, pig iron. I was mowing the lawn up to Lock 18. We knew the Frank Lowry was out of 17. We kept watching for it. And she started to come around the bend. They were very slow. The second or third boat back, she was loaded with scrap irons. She says, "What the hell are all those fish jumping alongside them? What's that splashing alongside the barge?" I don't know. We kept looking. To make a long story short, there was a kid. They had whole families on them barges.
Was this a family boat, or was it operated by one of the big firms?
I can't tell you truthfully.
Were there
At
many?
one time, she was owned by the Lowry family in New York City, or Albany. She was a family. She was a privately owned outfit at one time. I owe their company of water at that time. Get back to my story. Anyway, I says, there's somebody throwing stuff off that boat. Come to find out, when we got close enough, here this kid, he was 18 years old, 17, 18 years old, a big kid. Would take a piece of scrap on her and throw it over the side. And that boat was 6 inches higher than any of the rest of them. He'd thrown that much scrap iron out from New York up here. Because the deckhand told me, he said, that kid, he says, he's not right. And he says, the only way his mother could keep him quiet is to have him throw stuff in the canal. And he had thrown stuff in the canal all the way from Albany up here, and that boat was 6 inches higher than the rest of them. That's how much stuff he'd thrown out.
Were there still many family-operated boats at that time?
There was a certain few. Feeney out of Kingston, Connors out of Kingston, and this Frank Lowry was about the last. It was just about to change over from the barges to the your fleet of boats to your pushers.
What were some of the fleets?
Well, I can remember the tugs was the names of the tugs on the fleets. There was the Thomas, the Margaret, and the Philip Feeney. And there was the Elisa Ann Connors, the Harry Connors. There's another one I can't think of right now. And they were the old wooden hull, the old tugs, Diesel at this time, wild tugs. The boy that cruised on some of those guys were daisies, but I'll tell you, they locked everything up. You got a double coming through, you locked everything up on the lock. You locked the office, everything. Because when you're one man working alone, there's a lot of guys working on these outfits, And you got the lower half tied up down in the lower end of the lock. Those guys just stroll around, And man, they did. Boy, oh boy, they did steal. Oh.
They treat you as being green when you first started out?
The older men?
Both the people working with you and the people coming through the lock.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they of course I was just a kid, but they try and take advantage of you because you were just a kid, I told you about that coal incident.
Tell me again.
Well, they're going up west. They're empty barges. They're going up west, and I don't know what they were going to pick up. It was around Thanksgiving time. And the boats had to be out of here by it was before Thanksgiving. Because the wooden boats had to be out of the canal by a certain date in November, the 21st or the 15th of November. So they always had a line of bogus, and I should have been smart enough to...
A line of what?
Baloney. They tell you all this stuff, and half of it was 90% of it wouldn't be the truth. They're great bull dusters. And this guy come up to me and he says, my wife's got pneumonia. He says, I got no coal in the boat, got nothing to burn in the boat. He says, boy, he says, we got any old rags, we got any old... We just got a shipment of coal in, our winter coal from the locks. We had coal shows at that time. I felt sorry for the guy, and I says, okay. I says, so I give him a pail of coal. And I thought that'd be it. Before I got through, I was locking boats here, and the coal bin wasn't locked in the back of the old office. I think everybody working on that boat got 2 pails of coal and stole it, right? Because I looked, oh man, they really robbed me of coal.
Do you remember the name of the boat?
I don't remember. It was a Feeney or Connors boat. And there was one old couple in there that I'll never forget. Their name was Slyan.
Can you spell that?
Slyan. I think their home was in Kingston. Mrs. Sline is alive today. And they raised two boys, I know Bernie and Joe. They are the best tugboat operators, captains, that I know on this canal. Boy, those guys can come in and you don't have to be out there watching the gates or watching the walls or watching anything. When they come into a lock, you can come right in here and sit down and read the paper. When you hear the engine shut off, you know the boat's in. They're the most careful men and polite men, and they were born on those old wooden hull boats. Not much education. You know the education they guys right here from experience of years on here. Yeah. Mrs. Sline was used to come up here and double and take an hour and a half, hour and 3/4 to get through. If her boat was down on the lower end waiting, she'd take a pail and in the summertime she'd go up on the island there and pick blueberries. Well, one time they got all hooked up and ready to go and they forgot Mrs. Sline. They got up, they had to send a taxi back to Mrs. Sline to take her to 18. It's a great life. The canal is a great life. It's changed tremendously in the last, I'd say, it started to make a big change 10 years ago. Some of the guys, they're all good guys, but they don't have the attitude that they used to have. They come to work here, glad you had a job, you liked your job, you took pride in your job. I think the attitude of some of the guys today is you come down and you cut your paycheck and that's the hell of it. It's too bad in some ways.
Who was that person I was talking to last week?
Roy Cass? Well, that was Roy Cass. He was a retired engineer off the Tenkiness. That was a self-powered derrick boat. And she was a worker. If you had any problem, well, you called and got a little Tenkiness down there. A bunch of men working on her.
That's T-E-N?
T-E-N-K-E-N-A-S. T-E-N-K-E-N-A-S. Somebody got the idea that we didn't need it here in this section. They took her to Syracuse and tore her apart. So they got to sell the Ward's Island. It's the same type of boat. The Syracuse hook. And we had a flood. Raised the control gates down on the river locks, and your big trees and everything went down into your dam and your stuff. You couldn't get the gates back down. So from Syracuse, Ward's Island has to come all the way down to Syracuse, pay those guys overtime, all the way down here when they had the Tenkiness, and she'd have been right here.
Where does Roy Cass live now?
I think Roy lives in East Hootenburg. Pretty sure. Boy, he was a tough egg, boy. He took no crap from nobody. He worked for his father-in-law, where he got his training, Jack Flood. Jack Flood was the captain, and he married the captain's daughter. And they took no crap from nobody.
I think we can stop right now. I want to thank you very much.
Good.